Well, thank our neighbor for lending his car so we could come, because otherwise you wouldn't be here. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jasodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Jasodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamanatira Vanam Chadi Jamunatira Vanam Chadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jasodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Jasodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Jamunatira Vanachadi Jamunatira Vanachadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajagacharya Astathara Satasi Srimad His Divine Grace Sri Bhakti Vedanta Swami Shri Prabhupada Ki Gaur Premanandi Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. You expecting other guests? Because I thought I heard the bell ring. Did anybody else hear the bell ring? Oh, it's your phone. Okay. Okay, so this evening, looks like we'll be able to complete Canto 9, Chapter 12. It's been a nice journey with Krishna and the cowherd boys and meeting of Aghasura and Aghasura being delivered, receiving liberation, and nice discussion about how that's possible, how a demon can get liberation. And it was Krishna's desire, even before it happened. It was part of his plan. He brought Aghasura there for that purpose. And after hearing all of this, the summary section is Maharaj Parikshit asks, well, it's a few things. He asks Shukadeva Goswami, could you please explain how something that took place a year ago is being described as if it's happening at the present? And he concludes that it must be, so he's inquiring, and then he's offering a speculative, most likely guess, that it's something to do with the internal potency or Yogamaya potency of Krishna, because otherwise the cowherd boys, they're so exalted they can't be subjected to Mahamaya, so it has to be the other. Krishna is directly influencing them to forget. So what happened is, for a whole year, those very same cowherd boys were in a cave, and another set of cowherd boys who were Krishna's expansions carried on pastimes in Braja with Krishna. So that's the coming chapter. The question invites the whole next chapter, and then Maharaj Parikshit expresses his great fortune at being able to hear topics of Krishna from such an exalted person as Shukadeva Goswami. And then the concluding verse is Sutta Goswami speaking. So this is, the narration within the narration within the narration. That is, Sutta is narrating what he heard explained between Shukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Parikshit. So here's that final verse of the chapter, which is text number 44, 10-12-44. Prabhupada's translation reads, Sutta Goswami said, "Oh, Shaunaka, greatest of saints and devotees, when Maharaj Parikshit inquired from Shukadeva Goswami in this way, Shukadeva Goswami immediately, remembering subject matters about Krishna, within the core of his heart, externally lost contact with the actions of his senses. Thereafter, with great difficulty, he revived his external sensory perception and began to speak to Maharaj Parikshit about Krishna Katha. There's no purport, but I'll make reference to a similar place. It comes in Canto 3, Chapter 2. Chapter 1 of Canto 3 is a discussion about Vidura's pilgrimage. We hear about Vidura's pilgrimage in Canto 1, Chapter 13. He was insulted by Duryodhana. He left and he went on pilgrimage. And he heard from Maitreya and he came back and delivered Dhritarashtra. So that's spoken Canto 1, Chapter 13. And then not until we get to Canto 3 do we find um, Shaunaka saying to Sutta, what happened? Or Maharaj Pariksit asking Shukadev, what happened when he went on pilgrimage? What was it like? Where did he go? What did he hear? And that conversation between Maitreya and Vidura must have been really fantastic. Could you narrate about that conversation? So that was the question that prompted the discussion, the meeting of Vidura with Uddhava. Vidura meets Uddhava. And Uddhava asks topics about Krishna, just like right here. Maharaj Pariksit is asking topics of Shukadev. And what happens to Uddhava, hearing questions about Krishna, he loses external consciousness. He goes into a state of something, samadhi. In the verse, it says he went to Krishna. He was with Krishna. Just hearing about Krishna, he was so elevated and so absorbed in Krishna thought that he went to Krishna. Uddhava. But Uddhava wanted to be of service to Vidura. So he struggled to come back to external consciousness in order to fulfill his request, to answer his question. So similar is happening here. There's no purport, but we can understand the elevated nature of Shukadeva Goswami. Just hearing questions about Krishna, wanting to understand the more esoteric parts of the teachings about Krishna, he gets lost in samadhi. Immediately remembering subject matters about Krishna within the core of his heart, externally he lost contact with the actions of his senses. With great difficulty, he revived his external sensory perception and began to speak to Maharaj Pariksit about Krishna Katha. So here's the commentary by Vishwanath. Shukadev regained external consciousness because of the loud chanting of the Lord's name by Narada, Vyasa, and others present there. With great effort, Krishtrat, Bhagavat, Otamana, Otamotama, Bhagavat Otamotama refers to Shaunaka in this verse. So, picture by the bank of the Ganges, and we're in the 10th canto, and Shukadeva Goswami is being prodded to speak more Krishna Katha, and he loses external consciousness. So in the audience are Narada, Vyasa, and others, and they start loud chanting. Little Prabhupada story. This happened once when Prabhupada was on the Vyasa San in Mayapur giving a morning Bhagavatam class. And right in the middle of the morning Bhagavatam class, he spoke something and went into a state of trance. And there's details about what he spoke, but we're in the audience, and I had never seen anything like that before. Just a morning Bhagavatam class like all the other mornings. But he just was absorbed in trance. So one devotee stood up, picked up the mridanga, started chanting very softly, and we chanted responsively, and went on for some time. Prabhupada is in samadhi. And it wasn't exactly loud chanting, but he regained external consciousness. He looked around the room, class was over, he got up and left the room, went upstairs to his quarters. But here, Shukadeva Goswami is going to keep speaking. He's not going to go to his room. Jiva Goswami writes in his commentary, by mentioning Shukadeva as the son of Vyasadeva, Badarayani, his greatness is inferred. His senses were stolen by Krishna, filled with unlimited powers and sweet pastimes, from taking lunch on the grass to being praised by Brahma, or on remembering the question of Maharaj Parikshit. He lost use of his senses on seeing the Lord because of his strong prema. This is the anubhav called pramoda moha, and also called pralaya, or fainting, a transformation of prema, like shivering and hair standing on end. Jiva Goswami in his commentary commonly makes reference to teachings of Rupa Goswami on bhakti rasa or prema rasa. The lessons from bhakti rasamrita sindhu, or nectar of devotion, is in the state of prema there are various bhavas that rise and fall and mix with other bhavas and mix with other bhavas and mix with other bhavas, like waves in an ocean. And that constitutes what prema is. We'll say it the other way. What prema is mixing of different bhavas. What an ocean is the movement of different waves. It's water, and so with the water is bhakti rasa, and in the prema stage, bhakti rasa is mixing of different bhavas. So our acharyas are very skilled at identifying, see that wave over there? That wave has such and such name. That wave over there has such and such name. And when this wave mixes with that wave, then it comes out in this way. And when that wave and the other wave mix, it comes out in another way. There's a whole science to rasa. It's not absolutely subjective, or, there's a science to it. So vibhava and anubhava are mentioned. So anubhava is it's a exhibition. It's what that bhava does to the body, the bodily transformations. Those are anubhavas. So, like hair standing on end and shivering, those are anubhavas. So here's two other ones that are being indicated by Shukadeva Goswami in his narration. And that is pramodha, moha, and pralaya. So stunned and fainting. Pralaya, like, devastation. Fainting. He lost contact externally, and it was visible. So we only know what's going on inside because our acharyas are telling us what's going on inside. He was stolen away by Krishna. And then Krishna released him to go back and do some service. He again recovered his external senses after loud kirtan with instruments like kartals, conchas, and various drums. The word again, quote unquote, indicates that previously he entered such states. According to the wise, at such times Maharaj Parikshit would repeatedly call out, "Oh, Father!" There's a well-known story that because of this, Parikshit had his son Janamejaya keep by his side all the instruments for Krishna Kirtan. Slowly, Shukadev began speaking, since he was still overcome with prema. Quote, "Oh, Shaunaka, you are the greatest among the great devotees. Bhagavata Ottamotama. You are qualified to hear the most secret topics." Shukadev Goswami spoke to Maharaj Parikshit, the greatest of the great devotees. Then the reference to this verse, the final verse of chapter 12 of Canto 10. So it's in reference to what Shukadev Goswami, the state of trance that he entered into. Reference to this verse is spoken of way over in Canto 10, Chapter 60. This is in relation to Rukmini. Similarly, when serving Krishna, she entered into such a state. Here's the verse. This is 1069, 1060, verse number 9. Her hand, adorned with rings, bangles, and the chamara fan, Rukmini looked resplendent, standing near Krishna. Her jeweled ankle bells tinkled, her necklace glimmered, reddened by the kumkum from her breast, which were covered by the end of her sari. On her hips, she wore a priceless belt. The commentary reads, she made sounds with her jeweled anklets. She shone brilliantly because her anklets, rings, and other ornaments. She became unaware of others around her because of a spurti. Spurti. It's a word that appears fairly frequently in Chaitanya Charitamrita, sometimes in the Bhagavatam. It's a sudden eruption or a manifestation or an exhibition of very strong feelings of love, an awakening of love, a burst of love. She became unaware of others around her because of a spurti of Lord, as in the following manner. That refers to this verse. Shukadev Goswami, immediately remembering subject matters about Krishna within the core of his heart, externally lost contact with the actions of his senses. And there's other references. Shukadev replied, his heart fully absorbed in meditation on Vasudev. So Rukmini, commentary reads, experienced something similar to the following. Quote, this is now Canto 10, Chapter 29. Krishna is engaging in rasa dance with the gopis. Krishna threw his arms around the gopis and embraced them. He aroused Cupid in the beautiful young ladies of Braja by touching their hands, hair, thighs, and waist. Because of the appearance of friends, however, Rukmini's emotions transformed. The beauty of her secret experience is described in the verse itself. She hid her breast completely with the two ends of her cloth, which was long. She made sounds with her anklets, bracelets, belt, as she fanned him. It's just focusing on that, this last verse, the expression that Shukadev Goswami went into a bit of a swoon. He was unable to speak. He lost contact with his senses, just immersed, absorbed in Krishna thought. Again, this last reference is making reference to what happened to Shukadeva Goswami by making a reference to chapter 78 of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's interesting what you'll hear. It's very interesting. This is describing Krishna's having killed various demons, and then after killing those various demons, he visits Vrindavan. Krishna went back to Vrindavan after he killed the demons. And he didn't go back because there were still demons to be killed. And he felt if he did go back, then the Brijbasis could be in difficulty because of the demons. So, the Jiva Goswami is going to comment on the following verse. Having thus destroyed Shalva and his Sobha airship, along with Dantavakra and his younger brother, all of whom were invincible before any other opponent, the Lord was praised by demigods, human beings, and great sages, by Siddhas, Gandharvas, Vidyadharas, and Mahoragas, and also by the Apsaras, Pitas, Yakshas, Kinnaras, and Charanas, as they sang his glories and showered him with flowers. The Supreme Lord entered his festively decorated capital city in the company of the most eminent Vrishnis. So in that extended commentary of Jiva Goswami, this is a section about his going to Braja, which is what this is in reference to this evening's verse. Krishna's coming to Braja is also proved by the Bhagavatam, as stated in the following verse. As he departed, Krishna is leaving Vrindavan, going to Mathura on the chariot of Aghasura. As he departed, the best of the Yadus saw how the gopis were lamenting, and thus he consoled them by sending a messenger with this loving promise: I will return. Now later we hear in Brihat Bhagavatamrita, for example, the gopis were able to sustain their life because of that. Krishna gave a promise. So their lives were hanging on that promise: I will return. And then he does return. Here's mentioned in chapter 45 of Canto 10. This is Krishna speaking to Nanda Maharaj. He's making another promise. After the killing of Kamsa, Nanda is sent back. Now you should all return to Vraja, dear father. We, that's he and Balaram, shall come to see you, our dear relatives, who suffer in separation from us, as soon as we've given some happiness to your well-wishing friends. And then in the next chapter, having killed Kamsa, the enemy of all the Yadus, in the wrestling arena, Krishna will now surely fulfill his promise to you by coming back. That's Nanda speaking to the Brijbasis. Infallible Krishna, Lord of the devotees, will return soon to Braja to satisfy his parents. And back to commentary. Through his own mouth and the mouths of his devotees, he has made many vows, which could not be ignored. The words of the Lord are true. Ishvaranam vachak satyam. The words of the devotee are true. If he satisfied the request of Aghasura and Kubja to come to their houses when they asked only once, would he not fulfill his promise to the people of Braja? You understand the reference? When he entered Mathura, he was one of the persons receiving him was Kubja, and escorting him to Mathura was Aghasura. So when they parted, Aghasura asked, "Please come visit my home." Krishna said yes, and Krishna visited his home in Mathura. And there's a very nice exchange. And Kubja made a similar request, and Krishna fulfilled her request. So the logic is, will Krishna not fulfill the request of the residents of Braja and his promise to them? He goes on, not only that, he actually came, as stated in the Bhagavatam. This is Canto 1, Chapter 11. O lotus-eyed Lord, whenever you go away to Mathura, Vrindavan, or Hastinapur to meet your friends and relatives, every moment of your absence seems like a million years. O infallible one, at that time our eyes become useless, as if bereft of sun. That's when Krishna is returning to Dwarka. So the Dwarkavasis are confirming Krishna goes from time to time, Mathura, Vrindavan, or in Hastinapur. Likewise, the people of Vraja remained there within Mathura district, although all the people of Mathura were brought to Dwarka. That is, there's Mathura district, and Vraja is in Mathura district, the agricultural region. But when Krishna went to Dwarka, the people of Dwarka, the Vrajbasis, the Vrishnis, the royal family, they went from Mathura to Dwarka. But the Vrajbasis stayed in Mathura district. Desiring to see these people of Vraja, Krishna went there. It is logical to conclude that Krishna went at this particular time. At this particular time means in reference to his going after killing Dantavakra. He went to Vraja for 2 months. It's not described directly like that in Srimad Bhagavatam. It is directly described like that in Padma Purana. So that's what he's discussing here. The people of Vraja were also convinced that he would now return, since he had completed killing the demons. Uddhava had said that Krishna would get happiness to his friends in Vraja. And they trusted Uddhava, because whatever devotee says is true. That reference is made. Now, by having defeated countless enemies, the people of Vraja were certain that he would return. When the people of Vraja went to meet him during the eclipse at Kurukshetra, his return, accepted as a traditional pastime, will now be discussed. The Lord says himself in Kurukshetra, "My dear girlfriends, do you still remember me? It was for my relatives' sake that I stayed away so long, intent on destroying my enemies." Paragraph. This return to Braja is not mentioned in other Puranas because of the method of secret or indirect reference which is preferred by sages. In this case, indirect statements are used to hide the confidential pastimes from the materialists and to test the eagerness of the devotees. Though his return is not mentioned in many Puranas, the proof is in one place. Though Shukadev has directly described the bewilderment of Brahma and stealing of the gopis' clothing and Krishna's eating dirt, he indirectly mentions Krishna's return. Quote, Shukadev Goswami, immediately remembering subject matters about Krishna within the core of his heart, externally lost contact with the accent of his senses. That's our evening verse. Shukadev Goswami would faint. Sometimes he would say what he wanted to say, and sometimes not. Sometimes he describes pastimes in the wrong order. He gives examples. Though the meeting in Kurukshetra would take place before the killing of Dantavakra, it is mentioned much later. Another example, Baladev returned from pilgrimage after the Kurukshetra war, when all the Kauravas were dead. Duryodhana was killed after that. For the eclipse in Kurukshetra, however, Bhishma, Drona, and others came. So the chronology isn't right, because that came at chapter 82. And the Kurukshetra battle was long ago finished. But in Kurukshetra, the solar eclipse, Bhishma, Drona, and others were there. Paragraph. The order is as follows. First, the eclipse at Kurukshetra, then the Rajasuya sacrifice, then the gambling match, and the exile of the Pandavas, then killing of Shalva Dantavakra, and then Krishna's return to Vraja. When the Pandavas returned from the forest, Balaram was on pilgrimage. The journey to the eclipse at Kurukshetra took place not too long after Krishna had killed Kamsa. For it is said at Kurukshetra that Vasudeva speaks to Kunti in Kurukshetra, chapter 82 of Canto 10. Harassed by Kamsa, we all fled in various directions, but by the grace of the Lord, we have now finally been able to return to our homes, my dear sister. Because Vasudeva and Kunti were brother and sister, right? Vasudeva and Kunti were brother and sister. So he's speaking to her, not so long ago, we were able to return to our homes. And the last little reference is, this verse is spoken of by Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. A little background. Jiva Goswami takes teachings from Rupa Goswami. He was trained in devotional texts by his spiritual master and uncle, Rupa Goswami. So Rupa Goswami had already written Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which later Jiva Goswami made commentary on. But in his Sandarbhas, Jiva Goswami explains in Bhagavat Sandarbha, he explains the one of the dimensions of Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, is that he is the source and the shelter of everything. So since he's the source and shelter of everything, within him are all things, including contradictory things, because everything is within him. So then he goes through this exercise of identifying according to Yamala Tantra, an ancient scripture. It identifies faults, the 16 principal Maha doshas, or faults of living entities. There's unlimited, but there's 16 principal. And he identifies these all reside in Krishna. Except when they reside in Krishna, there's not faults, they're his glories. And one of those we've been speaking about, one of the faults of a living entity is friends and enemies, or partiality. And that exists in Krishna, but it's a glory. It's a glory. because his devotees love him, he loves his devotees. He's partial to his devotees. He's partial to brahmanas and cows. So another fault is dependency on others. It's a conditioned soul's fault. Too much dependency on others. But so Krishna has dependency on others. This is now from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And Jiva Goswami goes into it even more. This is reference to Durvasa Muni and Maharaj Ambarish. And Durvasa Muni is going to Lord Vishnu to get relief from Sudarshan Chakra. And Vishnu says, I'm completely under the control of my devotees. Indeed, I am not at all independent. Because my devotees are completely devoid of material desires, I sit only within the core of their hearts. I want to speak of my devotee. Even those who are devotees of my devotee are very dear to me. So it's the fault of dependency, parapeksha, that's a virtue or a quality. Therefore, it says in the Bhagavatam 10:77-31, how can lamentation, bewilderment, material affection, and fear, all born out of ignorance, be ascribed to the infinite Supreme Lord, whose perception, knowledge, and power are similarly infinite? If you remember from chapter 38, when Aghasura saw Krishna, what happened? He saw the foot dust of Krishna, and these lamentation, bewilderment, and fear left him. Remember that? So here's Rupa Goswami's commentary. Lamentation, bewilderment, and material affection and fear, when they originate from ignorance, are definitely not present in the Lord. However, lamentation, bewilderment, material affection, and fear, when they originate from knowledge, do exist in the Lord. These qualities originating from knowledge, such as bewilderment arising from prema for the Lord, are also present in the devotees. That's where our verse comes in. Oh, Shaunaka, Sutta said, greatest of saints and devotees. When Maharaj Parikshit inquired from Shukadeva Goswami in this way, Shukadeva Goswami immediately remembered subject matters about Krishna within the core of his heart, externally lost contact with the actions of his senses. Thereafter, with great difficulty, he revived his external sensory perception and began to speak to Maharaj Parikshit about Krishna Katha. So these, that's the end. Loss of memory and forgetfulness and fainting and these other things, there's the material and there's the spiritual. And within the devotees, they're spiritual, with pure devotees. Within the Lord, they're also present. He becomes bewildered, which is not possible because he's omniscient, right? But it's an experience of loving ecstasy that as the devotees experience loving ecstasy, the Lord is certainly entitled to loving ecstasy. And it's not like our getting bewildered or our having some momentary lapse of, lack of clarity or perplexity. It's an ecstasy. It's a loving ecstasy. There's a place where our acharyas describe, it's not, when those things are being narrated, it's not that even for a fraction of a moment, the Supreme Lord is anything other than fully conscious. So it's not that he loses his omniscience. Then he becomes omniscient again, or something like that. He's omniscient, and um, when there's from his side an exhibition of this exalted prema, like waves in the ocean, he is raso vai saha. He is rasa, and rasa in the spiritual world is bhakti rasa. There's material rasa, material taste, and material, exhibitions of emotion. And there's spiritual exhibitions of emotion, and the Lord and his devotees do that. They do that in relation to each other. So it's no surprise. There's a little Prabhupada story that I like a lot. One of Prabhupada's disciples, he gave the name Atreya Rishi, and he is from Iran. And later, Prabhupada assigned him to go to Iran and establish a Hare Krishna temple. There's a very interesting interview that, it's a pandemic times interview by two devotees who served in Iran for some time under Atreya Rishi, and described what that whole experience was. It was before the present person. It was when the Shah of Iran was ruling, the royal governance. But, it was still like a really intense place. Iran is Iran is Iran. So Farmars Attar was his name. And his occupation was, he was an accountant. And he was like a really high caliber accountant. They used to fly him, and even in those days, from one rooftop to another rooftop in a helicopter to avoid having to go through traffic to get him to the next place to do accounting. He was really high-level personality. And after he met devotees and began reading Prabhupada's books, he became very quickly attracted. And when they knew what his occupation was, they asked him to look at our bookkeeping for the temple in New York. And when he looked at the bookkeeping for the New York temple, he was shocked. And he wrote to Prabhupada. I didn't see the letter, but he wrote to Prabhupada, I'm shocked. Da-da-da-da-da. And Prabhupada wrote back a letter which was circulated, which said, don't expect utopia in this, even in the spiritual world. It was poking holes in this utopian idealism. Said even in the spiritual world, Krishna makes mistakes. And he gave the example in the letter. Sometimes when Krishna goes into the pasturing ground to milk cows, he sees Radharani and he forgets himself and he starts to try to milk a bull. So even in the spiritual world, it's not utopia. Now, he got on the case of the person that was doing the bookkeeping. He wasn't like overlooking the, what was going on in the bookkeeping department. But he wanted to teach Atreya Rishi a certain lesson. He was always giving lessons in appropriate ways to devotees. So even Krishna becomes bewildered, seeing Radharani or something, seeing the cowherd boys enter into the mouth of Aghasura, and he becomes bewildered out of his affection for the cowherd boys. And it's his own Yogamaya potency that's doing it like that. So similarly, when the devotee, in this case Shukadev, or in the other references made, Rukmini, or when other devotees undergo some ecstatic moment, It's not. It's not material. When the devotees do, then it's something else, and when Krishna does, it's something else. Now, for the materialist, that's like, well, that's convenient. You just like give it a nice name and perfume it, and it looks spiritual. Because there isn't any understanding of Krishna Tattva. And with understanding Krishna Tattva, these inconsistencies or contradictions or things can be understood in a scientific way. But it takes higher consciousness and knowing the science of Krishna Tattva, to understand. So that's just what's being expressed here. In the previous verse, before this verse, Maharaj Parikshit is saying, I'm your disciple, and it's the duty of the spiritual master to disclose even confidential things. So please tell me. He's eager to hear. Shukadeva Goswami is eager to speak, but sometimes his absorption in thought of Krishna is just overwhelming. But then he resumes the rest of the 10th canto, starting with chapter 13. So the plan probably is we'll begin chapter 13 tomorrow. Now, I already, in a really quick summary way, covered the whole of chapter 13 in a previous, because when this home visit type of thing started, that's where we started, was Brahma's prayers. And to do Brahma's prayers, which chapter 14, we did a quick summary of chapter 13 to get to chapter 14. But now we'll go through more slowly. Let's see if there's some comments or discussion.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. Thank you for this lecture, and your words pack a lot of information in it. So out of that, there are many questions that I got in this talk. So first question is, did Krishna actually relocate everyone from Mathura, only Mathura to Dwarka, and just leave out Brajvasis?
Well, there must have been some persons remaining in Dwarka because it didn't become like a ghost town. The explanation is, even before arranging for Dwarka to be built, there's an eternal relationship in the royal family, that there is a relationship with Dwarka. Although Dwarka was in the sea, there's a relationship with that place. The present Dwarka is on the coast. It's not in the sea, but this was a place built in the sea. But there's a relationship for the royal family, although the geography isn't quite proximate. There's some relationship. I've never read what that relationship is. But Krishna was not just creating a new place out of the air, but there was a historical royal dynasty relationship. Now, that's not addressing your question. Your question is, did he vacate all of Mathura? There must have been some people remaining. Because it's a city. But the principal associates of Krishna, where the division was, is not identified. But most of the persons were relocated. And the purpose, the ostensible purpose for relocating, was to protect against Jarasandha and his armies. And Kalyavana and his armies. So just to protect the residents of Dwarka, excuse me, Mathura, the Yadu dynasty clan, he relocated them. So majority or significant ones or something. Now here we're reading that the place was vacated. I don't think it means literally it became a ghost town. But the residents of Braja remained. Because they're eternally situated in Braja. They're not going to relocate anyways.
They had no danger from Jarasandha and others?
Yeah, that's correct. They were not, exactly. That's why Krishna didn't, when Krishna went to Mathura, killed Kamsa, etc., and sent Nanda back, there's contemplation on Krishna's part. The Brijvasis are feeling separation from him, and the feeling is mutual because he reciprocates the love of his devotees. He loves them like anything, but he didn't return right away, with one of the reasons being that if he returned, then the remaining demons who are, aggravated now that he's killed Kamsa and so many other things, they would go and attack the Brijvasis. So he wanted to protect the Brijvasis. They was part of the protection plan, not showing his affection and affinity for them. I mean, that's what happened with the Pandavas. Because they were dear to Krishna, there was animosity towards the Pandavas. And that meant animosity towards Krishna. And Krishna said that directly to Duryodhana. So they weren't at risk, like the Yadu dynasty clan, although they were more remotely connected, because royal family was all over the place. But there's some history that, like it mentioned specifically, greatest amongst the Yadus. So he's from that Yadu dynasty, but he's over there because one of the wives of Shurasena was a Vaishya wife, and so their son became the king of the Vaishya community, Parjanya, and then Nanda.
Thank you, Maharaj. That actually answered a great question, which was always there in the back of my mind.
Okay.
So another thing you mentioned is about emotions, which you actually talked about them as waves. So this wave combines with another wave and forms another wave.
Yes.
So my question is, for example, I do not know the difference between prema and priti. So there are different types of love and different words for it, right? So
Yes.
so I know some basic ones like vatsalya is what priti, prema. I cannot differentiate. So with all of these different emotions, harsha and ulasa, both of them are different words for happiness, but I know there is a difference, but I do not know what it is. So, do you have an example for all the different things that is mentioned?
Kind of. The language is, let's say two things. Language is context sensitive. So one word in this context, the same word in a different context may take a different meaning. Context sensitive. And another is, a certain acharya or great personality may, with some consistency, use a certain word in a certain way that another acharya uses it in a different way. So it's acharya sensitive and then context sensitive. So it's not like really straight and narrow boxes. And this word means this, period. With that little preamble, I've grown to appreciate, just by reading and reading and reading, that Jiva Goswami uses the word priti to identify the feeling of that, a loving feeling that someone in the stage of perfection has. Loving feeling, priti. And our Srila Prabhupada, and as far as I know, also Rupa Goswami, uses the word prema, indicating the mature stage of bhakti, prema bhakti. And Jiva Goswami likes the word priti. So there's not a one-to-one correlation, because although they can be used interchangeably, because they're different words, they do mean different things, that otherwise they would be different words. So what's the shade of meaning? My sense of the shade of meaning of priti is the feeling itself, the emotion itself. And prema carries a more broad connotation than the feeling itself. It's love, but in different aspects, according to, say, the primary rasas, specifically friendship, servitorship, dasya prema, vatsalya prema, madhurya prema. The stage of love that's of this type, the stage of love that's at that type. In priti, so once again, it's more like the affection itself. So in one sense, priti is a subset of prema. It's an aspect of prema. But to say priti, it's drawing attention to the same thing. And the Vasudev state, that's one of the other terms you mentioned, yes? Vasudev means Shuddha Sattva. Vasudev is the father of Vasudev, or one whose consciousness, maybe that isn't one of the terms that you use, but it's an expression in the Bhagavatam, and the Vasudev state can be achieved by anyone, in addition to the person Vasudev, the father of Krishna, Vasudev. It's a consciousness that's pure. It's a place where it's inviting for Krishna to manifest himself. That, therefore, it's called the Vasudev state. A state of pure consciousness, unmixed, Vishuddha Sattva consciousness.
That gives a good standing for me in my mind. Difference between, I did not know this. I did not know how to relate this. So Preeti and Prema. So it's a good example.
There's other nomenclatures that I've learned by covering this section. So one of the 5 primary rasas is friendship. But there's like 6 different terms that describe different types of friendship within the category of friendship. Maitri, for example, is just a general term that means friendship. And then there's sakhas, and they're very, very playful. But like the cowherd boys are Krishna's sakhas. But then amongst the sakhas, there's the little ones. There's the same age, and there's the older ones that take like an older friendship relationship with Krishna, and there's different nomenclatures for them. But it's all, the broader category is friendship, or say Maitri. And then there's really confidential ones amongst those. And there's different nomenclatures, which I'm not remembering at the moment.
Thank you very much.
That's it? Okay. Anything over here? No? Okay. Anything in the room?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. The we often hear 4 defects of the conditioned souls mentioned, but there is a mention of 16 Mahadoshas that are read today. So is this 4 part of the 16, and why is that other 12 or not?
I was reluctant to bring it up. There are different models of saying things. There's the 4 defects of the conditioned soul, and then there's 16 major doshas, and then there's unlimited. So it's something like, the answer, your question specifically are the 4 within the 16, and I'd have to go and look, but they're covered. Whether they're going by the same name or not, they're covered. It's something like, A or B or C. A, there's 8 separated energies, chapter 7 Bhagavad Gita. B, there's 24 elements in the Sankhya system. Or C, they're both correct. And the answer is C. So whether it's 4 or 16 or whatever, it's a scriptural reference. This Yamala Tantra is a scriptural reference that Jiva Goswami points to. And he wishes to say that these are disqualifications for a conditioned soul, but in Krishna's case, there's no faults in Krishna. They're within Krishna, but there is qualities. That's just what he's doing. So, no, but your question specifically is, are the 4 within the 16? And the short answer is yes. Maybe not by name, but they're there.
How I'm also thinking why the imperfect senses, when it is, how can it become a quality of Krishna?
Let's do that another time, okay?
Okay.
Here's an example. It's directly in Jiva Goswami's commentary. When Krishna was a child with Balaram, they would hear the tinkling of ankle bells. And they would follow the tinkling of the ankle bells, thinking it's their mother and father. But then when they realized it wasn't their mother and father, they were startled. And they went scurrying back to their mother and father, or Balaram to his mother. And they were embraced by Rohini and Yashoda. But it's the loving exchange. It's not the material kind of imperfect senses. There are cases when Krishna would exhibit these qualities that are not false because of prema and the exchange of love with his devotees. Anything else? Yeah.
Recently, a few months back in our Bhakti Riksha discussion, there was a discussion about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes and Jagai and Madai. And during that time, one of the members in that group raised an objection. How can God become angry?
Why not?
It doesn't seem to be a thing that God would be doing. That was the argument.
It's not material anger.
Yeah. But today, like in the discussion, you brought up that it's not like a utopian idealism, and there might be emotions like that present in the Supreme Lord, but it's not the material kind.
Yeah,
but
it's not the material kind.
It's a spiritual kind, and it's uplifting and benefiting to that.
The solution is not just whitewash it and paint it a nice color, and therefore, like now you can be not disturbed. It's not a whitewash. it's reality as opposed to illusion. There's all everything that exists here present in Krishna. Now, that's another, rather than going down the path of, well, everything and how does everything, and parsing everything. But Krishna's anger is not material anger. Material anger is triggered by unfulfilled passion, and Krishna's anger is not. There's no passion. There's no modes of nature. So what is it if that's not what it is? It's a transcendental emotion for the protection of his devotee, like the anger of Lord Nrsingadev. What to speak of, the Lord Jagai Madhai, Lord Nrsingadev. And Prahlad's understanding was that's not meant for the devotees. That's for the non-devotees. And, so it's an exhibition of his feeling of protection for the devotees. And that's transcendental. So is he supposed to be just like... Anyway, it's a transcendental emotion, not material. Prabhupada spent a lot of time addressing that topic. It's from Bhagavad Gita. Krishna's, because they were commentators apparently, I don't know which ones, but they were criticizing Krishna, that he was inciting Arjuna to anger. And Prabhupada would stand up and say, yes, he was inciting Arjuna to anger. Transcendental anger. And there's a difference between transcendental and mundane. Anything. And it's a fundamental, paradigm shift to say that the absolute is not the negation of everything that's bad in the material world. If something bad in the material world, the absolute must be free from that bad thing. So he has, no personality, no form, no qualities, no this, no that. It's the same mentality, but it's not correct approach. It's not one will not understand the absolute just by negation. There's transcendental anger. There's transcendental everything. Do we have online questions? No? Yeah?
Also, in today's discussion, we talked about the dependency of Krishna. Also, the scriptures say that Krishna is Atma Rama, that he is self-sufficient. At the same time, there is this dependency concept, which is like a contradiction. So how do we understand that, Maharaj?
We understand that by his absolute free will, like this example of Lord Vishnu saying to Durvasa Muni, I'm not at all independent. He's absolutely independent. And with that absolute independence, he places the fullness of his dependence at the disposal of his devotee. By not, because he's dependent, but with the fullness of his independence, he places his independence at the disposal of his devotee. He's the controller who has no controller, and he's controlled by his devotee's love. Ajita becomes Jita. Ugra becomes Anugra, etc.
Thank you, Maharaj.
One question, okay.
This question is from Uttama Bhakta Prabhu. Is bewilderment, confusion of Krishna one of the rasas?
Is what?
Is bewilderment or confusion of Krishna one of the rasas?
It's one of the secondary rasas.
The next thing is, do these...
Excuse me, it may not even be a secondary rasa. It may be, I think, actually, a correction. It's one of the sanchari bhavas. There's 33 of those, and it's one of those 33. It's not a secondary rasa. It's another bhava. Okay?
The next part is, do these so-called imperfections arise from Krishna's pleasure potency?
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yes. Okay. Looks like we've... Last chance. Nothing? Okay. 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 I'll be around for a little while, Krishna permitting. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.